Now let's discuss what to do if a concussion is suspected. What do you do after the game or the practice? When you have observed the signs of concussion and have pulled a player for the day, but believe it was not necessary to call 911, make certain that the player goes home with a responsible adult. If your league uses an incident report form, make certain that you fill it out as completely as possible, as soon as possible, including a description of what happened and what your reasons were for pulling the player and not allowing the player to return to practice or competition until they've been evaluated for the possibility of a concussion. It is important to communicate with the player's parents or guardians so that they understand that a visit to the doctor is necessary to rule out a concussion before that player can be permitted to return to any sports activity. In addition, the Brain Injury Alliance and the Rutgers Youth Sport Research Council have developed an incident report and a symptom tracking chart that you can complete and give to the parents of the player. This chart, as you can see from the slide, and you can download from this course, contains a section at the top of the chart for you as the coach to enter information about what happened that caused you to suspect a concussion. The rest of the information on the front page of this sheet is to guide parents about what steps they should take at home to monitor their child and what actions they need to take to document any symptoms to help any medical professional who might subsequently treat their child. The back of the card basically provides a 2-week symptom tracking chart that the parents can use to record symptoms and symptom intensity prior to or even while the child is under the care of a doctor. At this point, I'd like to discuss a rare but critically important issue associated with concussions. During recovery, when symptoms are still evident, there appears to be a period of increased vulnerability to a phenomenon known as second impact syndrome, or SIS for short. Second impact syndrome can be described as an event that happens when a player who is not fully recovered from a concussion takes another hit that triggers a rapid onset of a severe brain injury. If a player returns to sport before concussion symptoms have resolved completely, there is a risk for second impact syndrome. What we know about SIS is that it is very rare and it appears to be an adolescent phenomenon. We also know that the force of the second hit doesn't appear to matter. There's ongoing research so that we can eventually begin to understand why this happens. But for now, the important thing to understand is that the potential consequences of a second impact following a concussion can be devastating, resulting in severe disability or death. This fact alone demands that we follow the straightforward prevention procedures that simply require the athlete to have totally recovered from a concussion before being permitted to return to play. The table that's presented in this next slide talks about a graduated return to school protocol or strategy. Our understanding about how to get a student back to normal school activities and subsequently back to sports following a concussion has greatly improved. This chart provides an overall picture for successful return to school. While you as the volunteer coach are not directly responsible for what's going on in the school, this type of protocol typically comes before the return to play strategies, which we will see in just a second. Recently, the CDC published guidelines for pediatric mild traumatic brain injury that includes the recommendation for school districts to establish a concussion management team to support students as they recover from a concussion. The school team would follow the general concept as outlined in this chart, but with their knowledge of individual students and with communication amongst the student, parents, and doctors, the team is in the best position to modify curriculum and academic requirements over time as the student recovers. This second table represents a graduated return to play strategy. This protocol begins after a concussed athlete has completed a full day of normal cognitive activities with no recurrence of symptoms. The graduated return to sports strategy is recommended by both the CDC guidelines for pediatric mild traumatic brain injury and the Berlin Consensus Statement of 2016. The table outlines a step-by-step gradual increase in the intensity and volume of physical activity. Once a player completes one step, he or she would then move on to the next step the following day. If symptoms reoccur at any time during the progression, the player stops the activity and on the following day returns to the previous step. As the chart indicates, the protocol starts with daily activities that do not provoke symptoms and then moves to light aerobic activity in stage 2. If no symptoms are observed at that stage, the athlete moves on to stage 3, which involves sport-specific exercises with no contact with other players, no bodily contact, followed by stage 4, where you start to do non-contact training drills. If No symptoms of seen at stage 4. Stage 5 permits full contact practice drills. And finally, at stage 6, the athlete returns to sport with normal competitive gameplay. Both of these tables are reproduced for you on the fact sheet that you can download from this course and which will be described in more detail shortly. Now let's turn to New Jersey's concussion law that was passed in the year 2010. Every state in the nation, including New Jersey, now has a law designed to protect athletes following a concussion. These laws typically focus on public and private high school athletes, but they have implications specific for youth sport coaches as well. They're concerned primarily with 3 issues: concussion education for coaches, such as the course you're taking right now, the procedures for removing players from competition or practice if a concussion is suspected, and finally, requirements for medical clearance to permit athletes to return to play. The New Jersey law mandates those measures by which public and private schools must protect the safety of their K-12 student athletes involved with interscholastic sports. Obviously, that's primarily in the older grades, but it still involves the high school sports or the middle school sports. The law provides the school with immunity from liability for incidents involving youth sport groups if the youth sport groups sign a statement of compliance to follow the school district's concussion policies and has a liability insurance policy of $50,000 or more. These are issues that need to be dealt with by your youth sport administrator, but as a volunteer coach, you should know that these are guidelines that have to be followed by your organization. As a result of these compliance agreements that the youth sport organizations are required to sign with the schools, the youth sport organization must A, have the coaches attend the concussion education course, distribute a fact sheet concerning concussion information to parents and guardians of all youth sport participants, obtain a signed acknowledgement from the parent, guardian, and each athlete that they have received and read those policies, and they must adhere to the policy of the coaches must adhere to the policy of immediately removing any youth sport athlete suspected of sustaining a concussion from the practice or competition until that athlete has obtained written clearance from a physician trained in the evaluation and management of concussions. This completes part 4. This is an example of the concussion fact sheet. It contains copies of the 2 tables on the return to school and the return to sport protocols. The fact sheet contains information that the athletes and their parents need to know about concussions. The law, by means of this compliance agreement, require that such an information sheet be provided to the youth sport parents and the athletes before the season has begun, and then a signed acknowledgement of its receipt is obtained from both the athlete and a parent or guardian.